Hi, also, yeah, I'm here with John Potash. He's the writer-director behind a fascinating fascinating documentary, Drugs as Weapons Against Us, which is actually, I think it's nearly 2 hours long, but it's actually from an original book that you wrote, isn't it, John? And this is how it all started, so I'm kind of putting words into your mouth. Welcome, congratulations with the film, but yeah, if you could tell us how this all came to be.
Sure. Well, I worked for years doing counseling. I started as a drug and alcohol counselor in 1989, and I was also doing a lot of activism, anti-war and anti-racism activism on the side. And so through counseling a lot of people involved in the drug world, through my activism, through meeting different people, whistleblowers, CIA whistleblowers at activist events, FBI whistleblowers, and other people that were researching some of the same stuff that I was researching, I came to put it all together to find that U.S. intelligence has basically used drugs for social control. And I really wanted to get the word out on a lot of activism and a lot of activist history that wasn't talked about in mainstream media, and the way that some of those activists were targeted for their anti-war and anti-racism activism. And then I started to find I was also involved in reading poetry and a lot of music. So I read some poetry at the Lollapalooza Fest in 1994, for example, and met musicians there and talked to musicians there, and came to find a lot of evidence of the use of the targeting of musicians. But the manipulation of musicians to promote drugs, and then when they started sobering up and getting more into activism, I found they were done away with, sadly enough. And so I was writing a book based on this kind of information I was gathering. I first had a spin-off book based on it that ended up being the book, The FBI War on Tupac Shakur and Black Leaders. I made that into a more simple, low-budget film. And then I came out with this book, Drugs as Weapons Against Us, with a long subtitle just to beat media censorship. The subtitle is The CIA's Murderous Targeting of SDS, Panthers, Hendrix, Lennon, Cobain, Tupac, and Other Activists. And, of course, then to get the word out more to the masses, I came up with this higher-budget film, and I've already gotten distribution for it. It actually comes out January 29th on a lot of North American media platforms such as iTunes, Amazon, and it's, what else? Vudu, Vimeo, Microsoft Xbox, Google Play, YouTube for rent. And it's being sold in places like Best Buy and Barnes & Noble. It's sold on Amazon. It's sold actually at Walmart, believe it or not, if you know about Walmart in your country.
Yeah.
But, and so, so it's going to be available a lot of places. I'm happy about that. But, of course, I'd like to get some distribution in your neck of the woods in, good old England, Australia, Europe in general, and all that. So, we'll see.
And I know we've I don't say choosing our words carefully here, but you've already alleged some big names here. Yeah, Kurt Cobain, John Lennon, Jimi Hendrix, Tupac, Janis Joplin, Rolling Stones. I know we talked about this briefly last week in terms of the kind of problems you've encountered, because of course I think you've had a little bit of trouble in your neck of the woods in terms of getting this film out there, presumably because of the governmental agencies that you're targeting towards, and also because the names I've just mentioned. So are you able to give us a kind of flavour of the kind of grief that you've had?
Well, censorship is par for the course, because I show in at least one or two chapters of my book and a little part of my movie, I show how the oligarchs in our country, the wealthiest families in our country, just own so much of the media. I mean, estimates are 95% or more of the media are controlled by 6 multinational corporations in our country.
Yeah.
And so I show a little bit of evidence of how that works and how U.S. intelligence, CIA, and FBI are intimately involved in that, and their revolution as foot soldiers for the oligarchs. And so, yes, they've censored my work. I found that one of the few places that the censorship just doesn't apply as much is radio. So I've gotten some major nationally syndicated radio program interviews, and that was really nice, particularly for my second book, because I had a larger publisher for my second book who got it out, more widely. And then, of course, that's Drugs as Weapons Against Us, which the film is based on. And so even then, though, when I got onto these nationally syndicated radio programs, they would say, "Oh my God, we just lost our internet, connection. This has never happened before in an interview."
Wow.
And so, things like that just popped up with all kinds of major interviews I had. But I still got the word out there a bit, and in the film, I show the sources saying what I said in the book. The CIA whistleblower John Stockwell, for example, talking about the flying in and out of of heroin from Vietnam during the Vietnam War and flying back in guns and all, and sending that heroin to the United States. And another CIA whistleblower, Phil Agee, for example, talking about the U.S. intelligence, targeting of the Black Panthers, and particularly and also other agents talking about the use of drugs to target these activists. And then have people like, for example, Courtney Love's father talking about how he incidentally introduced his daughter to a CIA undercover agent who, when she was only 17 years old, and what happened thereafter, and have him talking in the film about that, and other whistleblowers, police whistleblowers, people talking, about the evidence and showing some of the CIA and FBI documents on Jimi Hendrix and John Lennon and their constant surveillance, and then the evidence of the guy with the exact same name as Cuba came out with, as was a CIA Bay of Pigs invader. This guy Jose Perdomo gets the job as the doorman of Dakota the night that John Lennon's killed, and the evidence shows that he was actually helped Mark David Chapman, murder John Lennon. And so, lots of different evidence such as that, and the top high level, police detective talking about why he thinks his fellow police officers murdered Tupac Shakur. So I just show a lot of this in the film directly from the sources' mouths of how this all came to be, and and that's some of my evidence for what sounds outlandish, but comes to be something that is just seems to be a little more conclusive by the end of the film, I hope.
Well, Watergate sounded outlandish, and we all know what happened with that. So. Do you? This is quite a strong subject matter you've investigated in terms of you've uncovered uncovered stones and put things into the light that have been in shadow. But that takes quite a strong character. Was there any times that you had either sleepless nights or thought, look, I'm not sure if I really want to go through with this, or were you just straight down the line? I'm gonna expose this, or were there any moments you thought, I'm not sure?
No, I had lots of sleepless nights, of course, and lots of times I questioned going through with it. And my wife still has times she questions my following through with this. She just voiced them today because I have a big interview with a Hollywood reporter today.
Wow.
But it's scary, definitely going through, and that's why I kept going back and forth between writing a nonfiction book and writing it as a novel. Novel's a lot safer. You can pretend like it's all fiction.
Yeah.
I put out the nonfiction, and now I'm writing the novel, which is the unsafe way to do it. But there I go.
So, no regrets at all. Now it's out there. It's all done and dusted. You're more than happy with doing this, yeah?
I am happy that I'm doing this. I mean, I feel like they just control. Look, while Trump's been in office, even more control has been taken over of the internet with the killing of the net neutrality laws. I don't know if you heard about that.
Yeah, of course,
what happened in the U.S. with that. and it's just put more censorship into the mix of getting the word out when projects like this. But hopefully there'll be other ways, like your great film festival, and I appreciate your interview for helping get the word out in other ways. And I find that I used a lot of British documentaries in my film because you guys are much less censored than we are. I mean, sure, you're still censored, but not quite as much as us. And I mean, really, in a big way, not as much as us. And so you guys offered some great documentary source information for a lot of the, some of the facts, at least in my work.
I think we're kind of used to it now because of the internet, and obviously we have global penetration and what we can watch. But I think even now, when I personally watch either the Fox News network, I mean, that is incredibly right wing, and I'm shocked at some of the stuff that's said on there, which I think is quite disturbing. Actually, kind of don't understand how they get away with it. But having said that, being balanced, I know there's left wing leaning networks, so I get that. But even so, it's quite surprising to see how vitriolic some of the comments they make about politicians are, and you watch it, and I find myself, I'm amazed that this happens. To be frank.
Yeah, it is pretty amazing. But I tell you, I mean, even CNN and MSNBC or other major news networks, television news networks are just slanted, even though they pretend to support Democratic politicians. Those Democratic politicians tend to be the mainstream ones, and they really, I mean, just looking at Bernie Sanders' run for president, they completely ignored him for however many months, even though, and they particularly ignored him because he was getting massive crowds. Tens of thousands of people were coming to his rallies from very early on. And only when they were forced not to ignore him anymore, because he was the only one left and he had such massive support and it was getting too obvious, only then did they start showing him on their newscasts. Meanwhile, on the other hand, they put the spotlight on Donald Trump constantly. And I wrote an article recently to show that was not, I mean, those decisions are made by the top, and I think they're made for very deliberate reasons. And so they obviously favored Trump. They, of course, didn't want Sanders anywhere near the presidency, and they didn't mind Trump being president, though. And so they only started attacking him once he's in the office. And so I think it's, it was engineered that for the FBI coming out with their, email scandal 4 days before the election, and it being, echoed by the media, mainstream media throughout the world for 4 straight days, 24/7. Oh my God, we're opening up the criminal investigation again on Hillary Clinton, and it kind of backs Trump's, lock her up statements, about Clinton. And so they put Trump in office, and once he's in office, and then they pretend like, oh my God, he's Putin's puppet, and back comes the Cold War, and so we got the Cold War revisited, and so now we have an excuse to have a war with Russia, and again, it's perpetual war. That's what our mainstream media is about: is perpetual war and perpetual racism. Me and my wife were watching some British documentary, not documentary, I'm sorry, British film, television show called Sex Education. It's just hit over here, actually, yeah. Yeah, and it just doesn't, it looks like a foreign planet. That world, it's hard to even see exist in our country. You don't get high school kids acting so non-racist and so open about sexuality. Our country's so hyper-religious that it's just, you just don't see that kind of open talk, that kind of open, non-racist behavior. So it's really interesting to see how different it is in your country than ours.
Thank you.
And, polls have showed that our country is actually the most religious country in the world for industrialized countries, by far. And England happened to be second in that poll, but far second. And, it's just part of the social control is through the incredible religiousness, of our country, of the population. And
just finally, how do you top this? Because, this is kind of for some people, this sort of film would be the pinnacle of documentary making, because it is such a heavy, intriguing, massive, interesting subject. How on earth are you going to get above this one?
Well, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for saying that, Steve. But, well, you know, look, I still kept my day job as a counselor, and that's what I want to do, is keep counseling. I mean, you know, sure, I would love to be able to make a living, you know, filmmaking and writing, but it just doesn't. When you write about the kind of stuff that I do, and that's the only stuff I really want to write about, you know, that's you can't make a living that way. So I guess I just, the only way I want to top it is by writing this, you know, more entertaining version of some of the stuff I researched in a novel, and then making an entertaining film based on some of his stuff as a, you know, regular film versus a documentary. So
a narrative version of this, so like version,
but just something more entertaining with, you know, allegedly fictional characters.
Brilliant. Right, John, thanks very much for that. I'm just going to stop the interview. That was wonderful. Thank you very much. That's a great interview.